a very warm welcome to this presentation and to this seminar that has been organized within the context of the STREACS project. And I would like to introduce you and thank in advance the Professor Norberto Pignatti for the interesting talk that is going to provide, that is energy security challenges and opportunities in the South Caucasus. Please, Professor Norberto, you can, if you want to turn on your camera, you can share your screen and we can start the presentation. And then after the presentation, we are going to have a short Q&A session.
Okay, do you see me?
Yes, we see you. That's perfect.
Okay, that's good. And you hear me. Very good.
We hear you perfectly.
Thank you for the kind words of introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here and discuss this topic, which is, of course, of great interest to me, as I've been living in Georgia for 13 years before moving back to Italy. Now I go back and forth. And and so I've had many chances to work on that. Actually, now I'm also expanding my interest to cover more broadly energy security in Eurasia. So this is, but always with the focus on the South Caucasus. So I think this is a very dear topic to me. Okay, I will try to share my presentation. Let's see. Okay. I hope you can see it.
Yes, we can see it, Norberto.
Good. I'm now trying to put this full screen. Okay. Good. So I thought about how to develop this presentation, and I opted for this structure. Well, first of all, although maybe there is no need for that, there was no need for that, I decided to start by briefly touching on the concept of energy security, which is an elusive one. If one reads the literature on the topic. And then in order to I think stimulate the discussion, but also I think to give some perspective on what are the current challenges and opportunities for the South Caucasus in terms of improving energy security, I decided to briefly go and look at the historical roots of the current situation, okay, which I brought back to the moment in which, for example, the South Caucasus constituted an integrated regional energy system, right, before the fall of the Soviet Union. Then fast forward to the current situation of the countries of the South Caucasus and the challenges they are facing. And then in the last part, a discussion of the possible ways towards increased energy security for all of the country, for the region as a whole. So, well, energy security is a complex, multidimensional concept. And then in the literature, there are many different definitions that are utilized. There was a work by Sovakol that in 2010, so 14 years ago already, identified 45 different definitions of energy security that were utilized in practice around the world. On the positive side, luckily, one can identify some common aspects in all these definitions, and in the one that followed that survey. And the core concepts are the continuity and reliability, basically, of the energy system, which are associated with the continuity and reliability of energy trade relationships. We'll see later in the discussion why also this emphasis on energy trade relationship. And then this definition emphasizes the importance of reasonable prices for energy, right? Of course, there are many other dimensions. That's why there are so many different definitions that are used depending on the specific country or on the context, on the goals that one has in mind. Most definition of energy security now incorporate also issues of sustainability, right? Environmental sustainability and social sustainability, plus technical and regulatory aspects associated with the functioning of energy systems. But as I say, the core is always making sure that the economy and the people living in a country and in society can receive the goods and services that derive from energy, and that requires the system to be stable, reliable, to have access to sufficient energy sources at reasonable prices, again. Now, there is also a distinction that one has to do, I believe, between what energy security concept implies for energy importers and energy exporters. Because in most cases, of course, we would instinctively think to the energy importer side, which has to do indeed with securing the energy resources for the functioning of the economy at reasonable prices, ideally also with the low negative impacts on the environment and so on and so forth. And so this emphasis becomes more on the security of supply. But it is important to remember that for energy exporting countries, while it is important, of course, to satisfy internal demand, that is less of a challenge, exactly because they have an abundance of domestic resources. What becomes then key is also make sure, especially if the countries are heavily, in a way, dependent from the economic point of view, from the revenues that derive from selling energy. Well, what becomes important is also security of demand. Therefore, that they manage to sell the energy they have, right? So that they can fill the government budget, and they can also get resources that they can use then to reinvest into the economy. And so net energy importers can increase the energy security by increasing domestic energy production, if possible, increasing energy efficiency, and diversifying their suppliers, while net energy exporters, of course, can, in a symmetric way, especially, again, if the energy sector is a key sector in the economy, try to diversify their customers, but also diversify their economy to reduce, or better, to increase their resilience to shocks that come from the energy market, okay, and have the potential to disrupt significantly their economy. So this is a premise. Why? Because, as you are all aware, the South Caucasus has two net energy importing countries and one energy exporting country. And therefore, it is important to have in mind that there are different points of view as far as energy security is studied, right? Now, as I mentioned before, under the Soviet Union, the energy infrastructure of the South Caucasus was developed in an integrated manner. And in particular, there was the Trans-Caucasus electrical grid that was designed as an integrated regional power system within the Soviet energy system. So the three countries of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia were not acting as independent energy system, but they were rather integrated. And this choice to have a regional integrated power system was actually built on the availability of different energy sources in the country, and in a way that could take advantage of the heterogeneous endowment in natural resources and that each of these countries had. And because this was a regional energy system, of course, the dispatch and planning decisions that were ensuring the smooth functioning, the stability of the electric grid for the countries were integrated, right, in a larger planning decision-making process. So how was this system built, and how did each country contribute? Well, in Armenia, Soviet planners built a nuclear power plant that was delivering base load and electricity, and was complemented locally with gas and hydropower plants. However, again, so why the nuclear power plant in Armenia? Because Armenia did not have the fossil fuel potential of Azerbaijan, and had a lower, albeit existing potential in hydro. Gas and nuclear power plants, however, were running on imported fuels, right, with significant amounts of gas coming through Azerbaijan and nuclear fuel coming from Russia, which of course was not a problem, as all of this was within the Soviet Union. Azerbaijan, given the endowment in fossil fuels, was a net supplier of these energy sources to the rest of the region and to other parts of the Soviet Union. And the contribution of Azerbaijan to the Trans-Caucasus electrical grid was mostly coming from fossil-powered thermal power plants. And again, so we have base load from nuclear power in Armenia, medium load from the thermal power plants in Azerbaijan. Also, in this case, thermal power generation was complemented by limited hydropower. And finally, Georgia, which had the largest hydropower potential, was in Georgia, Soviet Union worked and invested significantly to develop this potential. And so Georgia was contributing to the electricity system with electricity generated by hydropower plants. And in particular, the very large dam like the Nguri dam could help cover the peak load supply, given the characteristics of the hydropower plant with reservoir, which can be activated, it can be considered very responsive, even faster, of course, the thermal power plants, which is, again, why even currently everywhere around the world, hydropower has a potential very relevant role as a peak load supply provider. And in Georgia, so it was a thermal power generation that was actually complementing to a limited extent hydropower, right? So exactly because here hydropower was much more dominant, and it still is actually nowadays. So why this review of the past? Because one can argue that already at this stage, right, the different comparative advantages of the countries of the South Caucasus were visible and drove the planning of the Soviet planners. And this then has also consequences on what happened after with the fall of Soviet Union, and clearly explains what are the challenges faced by the Soviet Union countries. So the collapse of Soviet Union was a very traumatic event for all the countries involved, from the economic point of view, definitely, because the entire economy was resting on the decision of the central planners, and all the economic interactions were basically based on that. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed, all the coordination mechanisms collapsed as well. This is true also for the energy system. Actually, on top of that, of course, of the disruption of coordination, there were also the internal and external conflicts in which the South Caucasus countries were involved, which led to political instability, to this disruption of critical infrastructure, and of course to the collapse also of the joint energy system. And so, fast forward to the end of the 90s and to basically situation the countries entering the 2000s faced, each of these countries now had to pursue independently a path to ensure energy security. And so if we start with Armenia, it is clear that Armenia was facing extremely hard situation with substantial, so very challenging situation in terms of energy security. Due to the conflict with Azerbaijan and the closure of the borders with Turkey and Azerbaijan, now it could receive energy supplies only through Iran and Georgia, from which the gas from Russia was coming and has been coming until now. And basically had to rely on this gas to cover the gap between internal production and demand. And here I put internal production, renewable and nuclear, although we know that, again, nuclear fuel is also imported. And now, faced with this hard starting condition, Armenia has, of course, been aiming for a long time to develop its renewable energy base and also to increase energy efficiency. So that was a necessity, right? And again, the path comes, right? These needs come from the past. For Azerbaijan, the situation was also hard at the beginning, but then Azerbaijan managed to capitalize on its large fossil fuel endowment and establish international partnership to develop oil and gas fields, extract these fossil fuels, and bring in them to the international markets. And this brought into the country the capital. Of course, the international partnership brought the international capital that allowed this development and allowed also the creation of the channels through which, right, the infrastructure through which the fossil fuels from Azerbaijan could reach the international market, with the two key steps being the construction of the South Caucasus pipeline for gas and the Baku-Tbilisi pipeline for oil. Now, when we look at the power sector internally, having abundance of cheap fossil fuels, this and the availability of capital, this supported the expansion and the substantial increase of energy demand, and electricity demand, which was covered by expanding thermal power plant generation. And finally, when we look at Georgia, again, at the beginning of the 2000s, being also a country which had, again, substantial disruption in its infrastructure, and no capacity to extract or to rely on fossil fuel endowment, Georgia worked to restore its infrastructure in the hydropower sector and expand the installed capacity by adding additional hydropower plants, which has been, again, a driving trend and the driving goal for all Georgian governments since. And then, on another hand, becoming a transit country for energy flows, both fossil fuels and electricity, with the idea of fossil fuels just being transit country from connecting the gas and oil fields in Azerbaijan with the market, international market, and through Turkey mostly, but also electricity, and in this case also becoming, this was a long-term goal of the Georgian government, becoming an exporter of electricity, mostly generated, of course, by excess capacity in hydropower, which again which however has not yet developed, let's say, as fast as several governments in Georgian government were envisioning. So these two bidirectional, let's say, strategy has allowed Georgia to cash in transit fees and also cover a substantial part of its gas needs to provide by transit agreement, and to increase its geopolitical relevance, which in a way has also helped them enjoying some substantial level of attention and support. Now, okay, so these are three very different situations, right? Okay, two net importers, one, however, who is very constrained by, again, the geopolitical situation and having part of its borders blockaded. Another one which is trying to leverage its importance as a transit country while developing its own internal generation, and the third country which is a net exporter, which capitalized on its endowment of fossil fuels. So moving over the 2000 into these different directions, the three countries of the South Caucasus, of course, because of the differences in the endowment, in their opportunities, and in the structure of their economy, developed slightly different energy security concerns. Although, again, so actually quite different if you compare Azerbaijan and Georgia and Armenia. The difference between Georgia and Armenia are of a smaller order of magnitude, of course, because they are both sharing the fact of being net importers. And so the next step, of the presentation for me is to go quickly through the energy balances of the three countries, which give us an idea of where they are currently, and allow us to discuss also the main challenges they're facing today. I will start again with Armenia, which remains an energy importer. If we look at imports, they currently constitute nominally this 80% of total primary energy supply. Although, if we consider that nuclear fuel needs to be imported, what is really available domestically are renewables, and renewables are covering approximately 8.5 of total primary energy supply. And we see that indeed the degree of dependency in fossil fuels as well as in nuclear fuel is 100%, which is, again, highlighting how Armenia remains today a country with potentially high concerns in the area of energy security. Azerbaijan is on the other side of the spectrum, being an energy exporter with a substantial surplus of energy that it exports, generating substantial revenues and contributing substantially to the economy. And in fact, we see simple few statistics. Oil and gas make up for more than 90% of total exports. And the energy sector is estimated to contribute to about 1/3 of GDP, which in the past, even recent past, has made Azerbaijan quite vulnerable to shocks in the energy market, like it happens to all major energy exporters. Azerbaijan also has an issue with the fact that it is constrained at this stage still with, in terms of potential customers, especially for gas exports. Basically exporting gas, both natural gas and petroleum gas, in a very limited number, 4 or 5 countries, 6 countries actually. And so this exposes, of course, Azerbaijan to risks to its energy security, but seen from the point of view of an exporter. And then we have Georgia. Georgia's situation is to a limited extent better than Armenia ones, because the internal generation, basically production of energy, domestic production of energy covers approximately 22% of the total primary energy supply. But of course, the country remains heavily dependent from abroad. Another thing that helps Georgia, again, and it makes its situation somewhat easier and more secure, is the fact that being a transit country, it is for the gas and oil coming from Azerbaijan, it has always leverage and the possibility to, it has access physically to the fossil fuels, right, that transit its country. So in a way, it has a leverage also towards the suppliers, in particular Azerbaijan. So given this picture, it is clear that, and especially the countries without the endowment of fossil fuels, it is important to devise strategies that reduce the challenges to energy security and leverage on the comparative advantages. And what could this direction be? Well, starting from Armenia, for which the issue is, one can argue, the most pressing, if you look at all the 3 countries, given the high level of energy dependency and the fact that imports are concentrated among a limited number of countries, more concentrated, for example, than for Georgia. Armenia's pursuit of energy security should definitely aim at moving simultaneously, right, on different fronts. And one aspect, a key aspect, is energy efficiency, in the sense that currently the level of energy efficiency of Armenia is still quite low compared to the best practices around the world. And this, clearly, for a country that is energy dependent, is a first area of intervention. in which to basically reduce the demand, right? And therefore, somehow reducing the risk to, and now a second item is instead building on what is available, and Armenia has a substantial potential in the area of renewable energy. And so clearly reducing demand through increased energy efficiency cannot solve the problem, can mitigate it. Instead, developing domestic capacity is the way to go to more meaningfully and substantially impact the issue of energy security and increase the energy security. And the third one is, to the extent in which it is a gap remains between internal generation and internal demand, attempts to diversify suppliers, of course, would be also helpful, which again, attempts that are constrained, obviously, by the current situation, geopolitical situation of the region. Now, let me go quickly to Georgia, and then I will have some joint consideration about Georgia and Armenia. Now, despite the slightly better situation of Georgia, right, in terms of energy dependency and its key role as an energy transit country, which helps, right, and gives more leverage to Georgia. Also, Georgia is keenly aware, Georgian government, of the risks to energy security and of its vulnerabilities, and therefore, also in the case of Georgia, there has been a push to develop along the same lines, although not identical, but on similar lines with what was mentioned for Armenia. Therefore, aiming to increase energy efficiency, develop and exploit additionally the available renewable energy potential, and diversifying suppliers, right? So now we can look, and that's why I said now, after saying this, you see, these are overlapping, and that's why I wanted to then have a discussion looking at both countries, because all of these actions, again, efficiency increasing, development of domestic capacity, and increase and diversifying suppliers are shared possible tools and policies that these countries can pursue, of course, with some differences. Now, increasing energy efficiency in both countries faces quite similar challenges, in the sense that there is the need to develop a legislation and actions and plans and programs that do encourage the increase in efficiency. This can be done with command and control by imposing stricter efficiency standards in various sectors of the economy. It can be done by investing in renovating, of course, all the assets in the hands of the public sector. And it can be done, and probably also with a substantial impact, attempting to design better incentives, right, that encourage both businesses and the public to pursue energy efficiency. The framework is being designed, is being designed and developed and implemented in both countries. And again, the direction towards increased energy efficiency is a very important one. So, but then for both countries, probably the most important of these three directions is increase the contribution of renewable energy sources the energy system. Why? Because both countries have a large endowment, substantial endowment in renewables, and they don't have as much in terms of fossil fuels. So developing that is the key for reducing, right, the need for fossil fuels, which are mostly imported. In the case of Armenia, also reducing the reliance on nuclear fuel imports. But again, the top priority for both countries is to reduce fossil fuel dependency, which actually is also in line with other things. I mean, there are also external aspects, right? For example, the environmental aspect and the commitments to contribute to the decarbonization of the world economy. And this is, of course, in line with all of this. So the good thing for Armenia and Georgia is that the greening of the economy and the development of renewable resources goes hand in hand with the international commitments and with the desire to become more energy secure. So there are challenges, however. When we try, and the experience of all the countries that have been spearheading the expansion of renewable resources and their integration in the energy system, I mean, their experience has told us that there are challenges that must be faced also on this front. And namely, the most renewable resources, energy sources, are unstable and unreliable at times, and therefore, especially in the power sector, it is necessary to set in place additional measures that ensure the stability, the security and reliability of the energy system, and in particular of the electricity subsystem. And how all these actions require, for example, among the measures, we have the development of a commensurate base load capacity and peak load capacity, and an improvement in demand management practices. Right? So both countries are actively working and planning to move in this direction. So actually, the intention in Armenia to develop additional nuclear power to guarantee the base load, okay, and together with pumped hydro, which is a joint idea also. The same idea is available, of course, is present also in the Georgian planning. Georgia plans also to build additional dams with reservoirs and to exploit further its hydropower potential. So the use of nuclear and hydro in Armenia and the additional increase of hydro in Georgia is all very much consistent with this, both because it generates electricity independently of fossil fuels, but also because both the nuclear power generation and the hydro and the pumped hydro, hydro with the reservoir and pumped hydro, have a very good potential of integrating other renewables, right? But in a different way, right? The hydro is more suitable for addressing the challenges of peak demand, which cannot be by definition faced in using nuclear, right? Base load is a very different thing. So anyway, these are definitely actions that will contribute increasing energy security and are leveraging on the existing local resources. Another item that can help in this context is the strengthening of interconnection with neighboring power grids. So definitely between Georgia and Armenia, and then again, Georgia being connected to Turkey, to Azerbaijan, and potentially even with the EU grid through an underwater cable that would connect Georgia through the Black Sea to European countries in the EU grid, would help right? Strengthening the overall energy security of both Georgia and Armenia, potentially, right? So all of these actions go in the direction of increasing energy security and look promising, especially if coupled with upgrading of the power grid, because again, the smarter the power grid, the easier to monitor in real time what is happening and improve also demand management practices, which are a way to minimize the stress on the system, right? So it's not only generating more, but also somehow managing demand so that the peaks are less intense and maybe demand is more evenly distributed, which again increases the scope, the stability of the system and the scope for the use of base load energy, electricity, which is less expensive. So finally, about Armenia and Georgia, again, diversification of suppliers is definitely something that has to be pursued, but it appears at the moment more challenging, especially for Armenia, given the current geopolitical situation. And the idea is that, okay, both countries should continue their efforts and they are continuing their efforts in this direction. And hopefully, if in a certain future, the situation in the region would stabilize, that would also contribute substantially to the improvement of energy security, especially for Armenia, because having access to different sources of energy and also to more interconnections will automatically translate in higher energy security. Now, Azerbaijan, I looked at separately because the energy security for Azerbaijan are markedly different from those for Armenia and Georgia. Azerbaijan doesn't have any problem satisfying its energy needs. As we have seen, it is substantially, exporting substantial quantity of fossil fuels. The challenges faced by Azerbaijan are more associated with its dependency from the revenues that come from the energy sector and from its vulnerability to shocks that affect global energy market. So not only the shocks, but also the trends, because there is a clear trend, at least in the commitment of most countries around the world, to phase out over a probably very long time fossil fuels. But which means that, however, in this long term, Azerbaijan will lose progressively its capacity to contribute to the development of the economy with the revenues that gets from energy. There is also another type of challenge, of course, that having such a strong fossil fuel sector has had a strong impact and negative impact on environment of Azerbaijan, and that it might also be also provides incentives toward an adjustment, right? An attempt to reduce those negative impacts. In this sense, the environmental sustainability aspect of the energy security concept we mentioned above might become increasingly relevant, right, for Azerbaijan. And as the need to diversify its economy. So, to be fair, for a long time, the Azeri government did not move very actively in developing the renewable part of the energy sector, and which lately seems, at least in the announcement, to be somehow changing. Also in an attempt to diversify and also increasing energy efficiency, in a way to to anticipate the decline in fossil fuel and potentially set up the economy to become more resilient when, again, as fossil fuels will be gradually phased out from the world economy. And so, in fact, it has been mentioned in the discussion that by reducing the growth of energy or internal energy in demand through increased energy efficiency, and also which frees clean energy, and increasing the production of clean green energy for export, basically, the Zeri government is hoping that it might reposition itself and remain an exporter to some extent of, from fossil fuel to basically to green energy. But again, so this, of course, is still more in the planning than in the actions. So, concluding, all the South Caucasus countries to some extent are facing substantial energy security challenges over the medium term that require substantial transformation in the energy system structure, but also in the economic structure of the countries. On the positive side, all the South Caucasus countries have the potential to overcome these challenges given the natural resources endowment, as long as, of course, the policy take place, are implemented, are designed properly and implemented, having in mind the goal of increasing energy security. Frankly, if one looks back and looks at the endowment and how it is distributed among the countries and how the situation was, for example, under Soviet Union, it is still true now that the countries of the South Caucasus could benefit greatly from the stabilization of internal relations in the region and increased cooperation. To some extent, they could still complement each other and therefore increase the overall energy security of the region. But again, I understand that this is just at this stage a positive thought that we hope will become true at some point. I think I am done.
Norberto, thank you very much for the discussion that we had, for your insight. I would like, was quite comprehensive and was quite details on the different countries. I think I would like to, we don't have much time, we have only a few minutes. So I would like to open the floor to some questions from the audience. There are no questions, I have prepared a couple of questions. So is someone want to ask? Oh, yeah. Rudolf, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Fabiano, and thank you, Dr. Pignatti, for the presentation. It was very comprehensive and very useful. There is two questions that I have. So one of the strategies mentioned for Armenia is an increase in energy efficiency. I'm wondering to what extent is Armenia vulnerable to the rebound effect that one sees in increase in energy efficiency, whereby when energy efficiency is increased, the use of energy ends up being misplaced to other sectors as opposed to the reduction of the energy efficiency itself. That's question number one. Question number two, given the need for decarbonization and the energy transition, Armenia is seeing an increased uptake of EVs, which is likely to continue. And at the same time, I believe that many buildings now are incorporating heat pumps and moving away from gas as a source of heating and for cooking as well. Now, in light of the context of Armenia, given that an increased demand for electricity would mean either development of new energy technologies, which in turn is going to most likely imply an increased importing of fuels, is it better for Armenia strategically to try and find imports of electricity or develop internal technologies and see an increase in total primary energy supply imports? So in light of in the context of energy security, which of the two is, let's say, least harmful? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. This is very, very much to the point. Good questions, I think. Now, the vulnerability to the energy rebound is there. There is always, to some extent, the possibility that, of course, to the extent that increased energy efficiency leads to a reduction in the cost, right, of using electricity and energy in general, people increase its consumption. Now, from that, I would say that energy efficiency overall, I mean, it's also an empirical question. One would have to study a bit the context and try to understand, I mean, to simulate, one could even try to do some experiment to see the behavioral response of consumers. But again, this is my academic side that kicks in. I always like that type of studies. But I would say this, as one increases, works to increase energy efficiency, well, the design of proper incentives is paramount. And so, of course, on one hand, you can encourage by subsidizing this type of increase in energy efficiency. But on the other hand, you should also make sure that the pricing of energy is right? And so to the extent in which the energy price, as particularly the electricity price, if you want to move toward electrification, captures in some the energy security cost, internalizes that cost, then people will see that, will perceive, of course, that there is a cost that is not purely the cost of producing the electricity, and that might mitigate the rebound effect. I mean, it's a very theoretical answer, but it could be implemented. One would have to study, of course, the context and work, but I would work in this direction. So try to somehow internalize part of the cost to ensure energy security in basically in the pricing of energy. And this is actually related also to your second question, because when you speak, when we speak of the need to decarbonize and therefore increase electricity demand, basically, right? That raises issues for still, I mean, doesn't necessarily improve the energy security of the country in the short term, unless you can increase the domestic production. So that's why I said, again, energy efficiency is important, but the key factor is to develop the domestic capacity. The import of electricity is and the interconnection are crucial in the sense that all countries that rely, I mean, all the countries will increase their dependency on electricity, right? And because of the different characteristic of the countries of the South Caucasus, they will face different risks at different point in time. For example, the generation of Georgia depends a lot on the rain precipitation, because a substantial part of hydro is run-of river, which means it functions only when there is water in the river. They do have dams with the reservoir, but these dams are more suitable, I would say, more valuable to be used when there is a peak in demand. And so instead, for example, one could envision if there was enough spare capacity hypothetically in a greater nuclear capacity of Armenia, right? A greater transfer of base load to Georgia, especially in the seasons where there is low hydro generation, and with possibility for Georgia instead to supplement Armenia in other situations. So then, of course, if you integrate other renewables like solar and wind, there is a positive aspect about having a basket of those. For example, we were studying in Georgia the potential of wind power. Because the Georgian government for decades has been focused on hydro, and the problem of hydro is it is all correlated to each other. I mean, when it rains, it rains basically for all in all the dams. or in all the hydropower plants, which means there is a peak in the rainy season and then there is a lack of electricity. And we found that by building in specific locations, wind, it would partially offset the decline in hydro. So making much more stable the overall energy. So again, one has to think to all of these aspects. But I would give priority, of course, to developing as far as possible the local domestic capacity, especially in a situation like Armenia where the dependency is so high. But then I would use as much as possible the interconnections to stabilize the system.
Thank you, Norberto. Vincenzo, we have just a small amount of time. So Vincenzo, Professor Bianco, please.
Very quickly, thank you, Norberto. I'm Vincenzo Bianco and the participant in the STREACS project. A very comprehensive analysis. I have a question about what you said about on Azerbaijan that is interesting for me because it is the case of an energy exporting country, fossil fuel exporting country. You say that they are anticipating the depletion of fossil fuel resources by installing renewables and so on. They are trying to anticipate this trend, if understood correctly. But my question is a little bit different in the sense it's broader. Okay, they anticipated the depletion of fossil fuel and they start to installing or to plan the installation of renewables, and okay. But from the economic point of view, do you think that the countries start to planning the after oil era? Because now the economy of the country is based on fossil fuel exports. When this source will decrease, which will be the driver for their economy? Are they planning this? Because in Azerbaijan, this is a direct consequence.
Yes, so at this stage, they are not even worried about the depletion of their resources. Actually, they are developing even more fields. What they're worried about more is that the demand will decline before they finish to sell all of their fossil fuels. And frankly, I do not think that at the moment there is a very clear and strong substitute driver for the economy. These are mostly discussions, right? And I think the government is trying to prepare to some extent, but what we have seen on the ground is still very limited. I mean, it's more about, it was more a reaction to the fact that recently there were some shocks and so the economy was hit and the government felt, well, we have to speak about it and convey the message that we are thinking about it and we are working with it. I personally, at this stage, am not convinced that renewables can become the new oil for Azerbaijan because their comparative advantage on that is simply not as large as it is for fossil fuels. And therefore, I think the government should really think more deeply and in other directions. I mean, this could be one of the ways to diversify the economy, but it cannot be the main one. And actually, a good strategy would also be to accumulate and save some of the revenues exactly to be able then to invest and develop other parts of the economy that are currently underdeveloped. I mean, that would be my short answer.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I need to cut short. We have a last quick question from Sosi Takinian, and please try to keep short. Thanks. Thanks a million.
Thank you very much. It's very difficult to make it short. I had two questions, one about Armenia, one about Azerbaijan. First, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I was late because of another meeting, and I don't know if you would think of sharing your PowerPoint presentation. It would be really appreciated. It was very interesting, the second part that I heard. So I have written a book, actually published by NATO Defense College in 2008 about energy security and its link to Euro-Atlantic integration in the South Caucasus, but it was very long time ago. although some things are the same. And about Armenia, as you know, we are thinking, and we had actually to plan it a long time ago. We are running really late, a new nuclear power plant. But the issue, there are a lot of questions there. Now, the option of these American small modular reactors is on the agenda. And I'm not a technical expert. I'm a foreign policy expert, but I feel like these small modular reactors are just too small. I think they are for a submarine. I feel like Armenia needs something medium size. Do you have any perspective on that? And as for Azerbaijan, it's not a secret that there are a lot of analyses that actually, in order to meet its commitment to the EU, it's importing Gazprom gas, and most likely it's mixing it with the Azerbaijani gas supplied to Europe. And if 2 years ago, when EU was surprised to hear this, now it seems it's not even a secret. And it seems that EU is completely fine with it, and even Ukraine is fine with it. Do you have any perspective on this issue? Because it's a little funny that Azerbaijan has become an alternative gas supplier, but actually it's partially Russian gas going to Europe through Azerbaijan. Thank you.
All right. So about the nuclear power plant, I'm not a technical expert on nuclear power plants. I've been reading. My impression is that there are several technologies currently being studied around the world. And again, the small scale modular nuclear power plants basically, if I understand correctly, can be combined in exactly because they're modular and to develop the desired generation capacity. They might theoretically be more easily manageable, and you can more easily add the capacity. It might be even, so it would be interesting also to check, I think, on the security side. I see that new generations of nuclear power plants also are being designed to be self-extinguishing. So, and in a situation like the South Caucasus, where there is a high level of risk from the geological point of view, it would be, hopefully important to have the safest technology possible. I'm not sure it is that one, but again, I think it's a good sign. It's always good to have options to choose from, right? And to try to take advantage. One can combine different technologies, and to the extent that it suits the country. So again, one would have to go a bit deeper on this, but I believe that why not? It could be, and doesn't need to be one-way street, right? One-way solution. One could even have a plant and then complement it with additional modular capacity, and so on and so forth, so as needed. For the Azerbaijan, it's a broader issue. Unfortunately, again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the EU, but what I have seen is that the EU is facing issues on the energy front. And it's not only Azerbaijan. It's when the EU imports oil or imports oil products, for example, it never knows if there is Russian oil in it. And there is a high likelihood that there is, because we have increased imports, for example, from India, which is the country that has been absorbing a large chunk of the oil export of Russia after Europe stopped buying it. So yeah, it is unfortunately very hard to prove that what percentage of oil or gas in the gas and oil that EU imports comes from Russia. And I agree that it defeats partially, at least, the purpose of all the sanctions, because again, there are costs that also the EU pays for not buying directly the oil and gas from Russia. And if it ends up buying it indirectly, that's unfortunate and it's costly, uselessly costly. But anyway, yeah, this is something that I see, I observe. I don't really have a solution for at this stage. It's unfortunately.
Thank you. And can you share your presentation? Is it possible?
Yes, I will talk to
Yes.
Alain and the organizers, and I will share the presentation. Yes, no problem.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Awesome.
So, thank you very much, Professor Norberto Pignatti. Thanks, Ossi, for the question. Thanks to all the audience. We reached almost 50 people into this seminar, so it was a great success. And, you know, we will keep in touch in the next, you know, for the next seminar. In the meantime, thank you again, Professor, for the support and the help and the insight in this presentation. And thank you to the whole audience. See you
Thanks for
on
having me.
STREACS.
Bye. See
Take
you.
care. See you. Bye.